This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Suspected militant attack on a funeral leaves 65 dead in Nigeria. UNSC to be briefed on the situation in Libya. And Beijing responds to social unrest in Hong Kong following more violent clashes. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. Top negotiators from China and the United States to meet in Shanghai on Tuesday and Wednesday for continued trade talks. And in sports, China beat Cameroon in pre-basketball World Cup exhibition match. We start in Nigeria, where the military is searching for perpetrators responsible for killing dozens of villagers over the weekend. Suspected Islamists attacked a group returning from a funeral in the northeastern Borno region, killing 65 people. Authorities fear the death toll could rise. President Muhammadu Buhari has condemned the attack.
Sunday's attack has been described as one of the deadliest on civilians in recent years.
They attacked them at the graveyard. Immediately they killed 21. So later, when the remaining people heard about it, then they went after them. They still killed them. That makes the total up to 65 people.
Personally came here to condole them. I sincerely sympathize with the families. And may Almighty Allah in His infinite wisdom admit them to Jannatul Firdaus, and may the families bear the fortitude of this irreparable loss.
No group has claimed responsibility, but fingers point at the Boko Haram group and rival Islamist State in West Africa splinter group. The groups have often carried out attacks in the area. It is also thought the attack was a reprisal mission. 2 weeks ago, the residents killed 11 Boko Haram fighters when they approached their village. Borno, CGTN.
Well, for more on this, we are now joined by CGTN's Phil Ihaza, who is in Abuja for us. Phil, do we know who carried out this latest attack?
Well, thank you, Karen. So far, no group has come out to claim responsibility for the attacks, but we know that the semblance of the attack bears, or the attack has a semblance and bears the hallmark of the insurgents Boko Haram. But then we also know that the Boko Haram sect has splinter groups, two factions majorly that are known to us. That's one of the group loyal to Abubakar Shekau, the historic leader of the group, and another one loyal to or led by Abu al-Banawi, who is also or has pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. They are also known as the Islamic State of West Africa province. Now, if you look at the nature of the attack, or both groups' attacks in recent times, you see that the Abubakar Shekau-led faction mostly carries out suicide attacks, attacks soft targets, also attacks villages and burns down houses, and then also steal food and supplies, while the other faction is mostly attributed to attacks on military formations, stealing weaponry, ammunition, and all of that. So, but it's difficult to really say which of those factions carried out the attacks. Either of them might have carried out the attacks, especially as it was a reprisal one. The local government chairman, local government chairperson, that's what's his name now? The local government chairperson, Umaru, actually said, yes, that it was a reprisal attack because the villagers who have been, defending themselves in a while, actually chased the sect and killed 11 of the members 2 weeks ago. So they decided to retaliate this time and ambush them, killing 65 in all. So we really cannot say which of the faction, but it's safe to say that it is indeed an insurgent attack.
And Phil, President Buhari has condemned the attack and directed the country's Air Force and Army to begin air patrols. What more do you know about that?
Well, so far we know that the statement has been attributed to the presidency, specifically the spokesperson, the chief spokesperson of President Muhammadu Buhari, Gabashe, who's saying that you know, the military should go all out to fish out the perpetrators. Specifically, an air patrol has been ordered for the military and Air Force to ensure that they try to you know, discover the hideout of these terrorist groups and fish out the perpetrators of this attack, which is seen as one of the deadliest so far in the year 2019. But then we also know that the nation currently, as we speak, is on some sort of security alert, because there are several fronts of insecurity challenges that the country, the Nigerian state, is faced with. In fact, coming to the capital here in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, since last week, there's been air patrol as well to try to monitor several activities that are linked to protests by the Islamic movement of Nigeria. So it is safe to say that the air patrol is called for, it's needed, but also security analysts have said that way beyond that, the military should go ahead to try to get intelligence for, you know, attacks that are still incoming, so that the military can be proactive rather than reactive.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was CGTN's Phil Ahaza there in Abuja on the latest attack in northeastern Nigeria. Well, it's been 10 years since Boko Haram launched its insurgency in northern Nigeria. Attacks by the militant group Boko Haram have forced millions to flee their homes, causing an overflow at camps for internally displaced persons in Maiduguri. At least 27,000 people have lost their lives in the campaign of violence. The Islamist group initially started out as a movement rallying against corrupt officials in the northeastern part of the country, but its decade-long insurgency is devastating the region. CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy tells us more.
Since the start of the year, more than 100,000 people have been fleeing the long Boko Haram insurgency. Majority of them fear returning to their homes.
Now I'm in God's hands. If peace is restored one day and I'm told that I can go back home, I'll go back to my village immediately. But as time goes by, the situation isn't changing, so there's no way I can go home.
For over a decade, attacks by Boko Haram have killed 27,000 people. Nearly 2 million others have been displaced. Mass kidnappings have also been a common occurrence. In 2014, the militant seized the world's kidnapped nearly 300 schoolgirls from Chibok. Some have since been released, others remain in captivity. At the displacement camps, international aid agencies struggle to cater basic needs.
Hunger is the biggest problem. We are starving. We just need people to give us something to eat. I work so that I can eat, but I'm still hungry.
The government is using people to return home as soon as the situation becomes better. Some of the IDPs have tried returning to their homes but have been forced to go back to Maiduguri due to the constant attacks by the Islamist group.
I just thought that my life is in risk and my children, because no quality education, no health services, no, it's too much. So I have to come back. I'm just like, I'm living in a cage. Yeah, because you are sharing a room with a family of 6. It's not easy.
10 years on, the violence by Boko Haram still continue. Thousands are still fleeing their homes. The Nigerian government, however, insists that they have managed to defeat the sect. Daniel Arapmoy, CGTN.
Well, for more analysis, I am now joined by Roy Ohichie-Vie, a security consultant and retired military officer in Lagos. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been 10 years since Boko Haram launched their insurgency. Tens of thousands have been killed and close to 2 million people displaced. What do you think drives this militant group?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Well, you see, the opportunities for terrorism to take shape in Nigeria is also related to the relationship and the opportunities to penetrate our borders through the neighboring countries. And you need to look at the issues concerning incontinuity, lack of continuity of security strategies. Anytime there is a change in baton of a security chief or of government, then the whole truncates the former strategy that is in place and they bring in a new strategy. Then you need to also look at corruption. You know, everybody is aware that corruption is already a weak link in our opportunity to strengthen our hold on security. And it has permeated into even government agencies, and the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission are doing their best to make sure they track all illegal transactions, especially in the area of delivering security. Then you need to look at the lack of trust and connectivity between agencies, you know, even within agencies. So, and the issue of our religious, ethnic, and political affiliations is also a challenge. We have all of these as a myriad of opportunities for the terrorist group to thrive, and we need to look at strengthening the strongholds.
Well, in the light of these challenges that you've just mentioned, would you say that President Buhari's promise to improve security isn't working exactly? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I look at the strategy to improve security by this regime as really restricted to containment, not reintegration. What we are doing right now, we are trying to contain the terrorist groups to the northeast and see how we can keep them there, not to go into other parts of the country. And the appropriate strategy would have been for reintegration of the society, the communities to thrive again, farming system, trading systems, and other commercial activities to begin to boom and reduce poverty. Now you can see that schools are not running, markets are not running, the farms, the fishermen, they are not in business. Now, once this cannot be reintegrated, the opportunities to actually take out the terrorist attacks is going to be difficult. So the government needs to look at that reintegration. They need to pump in more policing measures. They need to make sure that the forest areas are policed and every community is under government policy and government control. So we need to reduce the activities for containment alone into reintegration to the society.
Well, Nigerian officials, they've repeatedly claimed victory over Boko Haram, and residents say that the attacks are continuing with no end in sight. What additionally needs to be done to secure northern Nigeria?
Well, I've had so many times where government officials come to say they have achieved victory. But we need to understand that there's a dynamics going on right now. The terrorist groups themselves, they are disintegrating. There is so many other factions that are coming up, and the issues ISIS is having world over is beginning to have a stronghold also in Nigeria. So we're also looking at ISIS, we're looking at Boko Haram, and we're looking at the factions in Boko Haram already existing. And we're looking at the issues of banditry. We're looking at the issues of herdsmen attacks, and all of these myriad of armed men marauding and penetrating our space has actually not going to give a good record on that statement that we're having victory. So you may have had victory. You know, we had 2 strikes on the military bases last time and there was a little calm. And after that calm, I was mentioning that, look, this is not a time to give attention to petty issues like kidnapping. The military should actually use that opportunity to rejig. And we just had another attack where people that went for burial services, mourners, up to how many numbers of them were killed by these terrorist groups. So I think using the word victory is wrong. And I think we need to reposition ourselves to understand that the terrorism is a dynamic activity and we need to change our strategies at all times. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that analysis. That was Roy Ohijevie, their security consultant and retired military officer in Lagos, on the very complex picture of the security situation in northern Nigeria. Well, staying in Nigeria, a Shia group has condemned a court order that allows the government to label it a terrorist organization. Local newspaper Punch has reported that a court in Abuja had granted an order permitting the government to call the IMN's activities terrorism and illegal. The authorities need to publish the order in the State Gazette and 2 newspapers for it to come into force. The move comes after a spate of deadly protests in the capital, Abuja. At least 6 protesters, a trainee journalist and a senior police officer were killed when violence flared during a march by the Islamic Movement of Nigeria. The group has been demanding the release of its jailed leader, Ibrahim Zakzaki.
IMN is a tendency. It is not an organization. It has never been registered anywhere, in any state of the federation. Therefore, it does not exist legally. It's not a legal body, and therefore cannot be prescribed. We are going to appeal and inform the judge who did that he did it out of ignorance.
Meanwhile, the Kaduna High Court is expected to rule on whether Nigerian Shia leader Ibrahim el-Zakzaki will be allowed to leave Nigeria to receive medical treatment abroad. The Sheikh's health has been deteriorating. A medical report published by a team of doctors led by the Islamic Human Rights Commission found high toxicity levels in his body. CGTN's Michael Karanja takes a look at how el-Zakzaki became a challenge for Nigeria's government.
In the mid-1970s, a group of Muslim students in Nigeria went around universities vandalizing bars. They were calling for implementation of Islamic law. Among the young cadres was a man named Ibrahim el-Zakzaki. Almost non-existent 3 decades ago, Shia Islam has spread through parts of Nigeria. El-Zakzaki is the first Shia sheikh in the West African nation. Over the years, his Shia sect grew in numbers in Kaduna, a state run by a Sunni Muslim. El-Zakzaki has been described as a disruptor of status quo in Kaduna State, as well as an outspoken critic of the political elites. His organization is made up of minority Shia Muslims. The group says it has been targeted for upholding religious beliefs that differ with the Sunni principles on semantics. Starting in the early 1980s, el-Zakzaki and his followers were constantly harassed by military regimes, and he has been imprisoned countless times. Since 2014, human rights activists say Nigerian state forces have killed 700 of IMN activists. This includes the 6 sons of leader el-Zakzaki, as well as senior leaders in his movement. In 2015 alone, more than 300 IMN workers were killed when they tried to block a convoy of the Nigerian army chief. The leader's continuous detention is reportedly for public safety and in the best interest of the nation. Michael Karanja, CGTN.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including at least 49 arrested in latest demonstration in Hong Kong. And Sudan extends ceasefire with southern rebels.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Libyan authorities have buried the bodies of 46 migrants from last week's Mediterranean boat disaster. The victims were placed in unmarked graves at a cemetery for unidentified people in the Libyan town of Tajura on Sunday. Around 62 bodies were recovered from waters off Libya after the boat capsized off the Libyan coast as the migrants tried to cross to Europe. Authorities plan to bury more bodies in the coming days. They estimate that there were some 350 migrants on the boat when it went down. They included nationals from Eritrea, Egypt, Sudan and Libya. A top UN official described the shipwreck as the worst Mediterranean tragedy so far this year.
We were saved, and here we are today to bury 46 of our brothers, children and women. They washed ashore from the sea dead.
Well, the United Nations Security Council will today be briefed on the situation in Libya. The meeting comes amid clashes in and around Tripoli as government forces and eastern rebels battle for control of the capital. 5 doctors in the south of Tripoli are among the latest victims. They were killed in an airstrike said to have been carried out by the eastern commander Khalifa Haftar. Earlier this month, the UNSC failed to agree on a document that would have called on warring sides to immediately de-escalate the situation and commit to a ceasefire. The fighting in Tripoli has killed more than 1,000 people so far and injured more than 5,000 people. That's according to the World Health Organization. Well, for more on this, we are now joined by Bassem Ali, researcher in political science at Cairo University and editor at Ahram Online. Thank you very much for joining us. What action should we expect from the UNSC after this briefing? Previous meetings have not really come to anything, have they?
I think it's time to hear more details about the UN peace initiative that we've recently heard about from the UN representative, and that included the establishment of a peace forum, having an investigation over war crimes, and at the same time holding elections. But here we have a number of issues that we need to discuss. What are the dynamics? How can they impose this deal? How can they persuade both parties to the conflict to sit and negotiate and reach a settlement? I think this is what the UN Security Council should tell us about after the meeting, and in order to make some progress or give an indication that the peace process is moving in the right direction.
Well, 2 weeks ago, we saw a united appeal from the US, Italy, UK, France and the UAE for a ceasefire, but the situation on the ground remains volatile. In your opinion, is there genuine political will from the international community to solve the crisis in Libya?
The Prussian military general and classical theorist Karl von Clausewitz had a very famous quote in which he said, "War is a continuation of politics by other means." And that tells a lot about why the Libyan conflict remains unresolved so far. Both parties need to find out why the peaceful mechanisms, why the political mechanisms is more useful for them than going to war or maintaining conflict. We have seen in all rounds of peace talks and in the past years that there is an issue in terms of trust. Both parties don't trust each other. At the same time, the international community didn't manage to make like a common ground between them in this aspect. So if not each one of them has or is not provided by a strong set of explanations on why it's good for them to drop weapons and negotiate, it's very hard to end the conflict, and the situation will remain volatile for a long time in the future. So I think first trust has to be in place, and that should be the responsibility of the United Nations and the international community. Otherwise, it's very hard to turn the peace objective into reality on the ground.
Okay, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Bassem Ali, researcher in political science at Cairo University and editor at Ahram Online. Moving on to other news now, to Hong Kong, and according to a local newspaper, police have arrested 49 people for illegal assembly and possession of weapons. Tens of thousands of protesters dressed in black set off in several directions, blocking major roads, with some dismantling street signs and fences. Well, the protesters are mainly young people armed with gas masks and body armour. The police tried to disperse the crowds. Well, the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office of China's State Council has given a press conference on the situation in Hong Kong. A spokesperson said the protests damaged Hong Kong's economy and society. He condemned what he called radical protesters who disregard law and order. It was the first press conference by the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office since the start of the protests nearly 2 months ago, and legislation that would have allowed the transfer of criminal suspects to jurisdictions including the mainland. The latest round of demonstrations in the city marked the 8th consecutive weekend that protesters have taken over the busy streets and clashed violently with police. Sudan and South Sudan's officials have agreed with the leader of armed groups operating along their joint border to extend a ceasefire. The agreement, reached in South Sudan's capital Juba, also grants access to humanitarian workers to areas affected by conflict in Sudan. CGTN's Patrick Oyet now reports.
Sudan and South Sudan have in the past accused one another of supporting armed groups on each other's territories. The two countries share a long and porous border. The negotiations in Juba centered on armed groups operating in regions along the border with South Sudan. One such armed group is known as Sudan People's Liberation Movement Army North, or SPLMA North, which signed a ceasefire agreement with Sudan in April this year after the fall of former President Omar al-Bashir. That deal covers the Blue Nile and South Kordofan regions of Sudan, but that agreement was expiring at the end of this month. The Juba meeting renewed the ceasefire deal. SPLMA North says the parties will continue with talks aiming for lasting peace throughout Sudan.
This is a preliminary discussion that is leading to concrete discussion in the future, and we have actually reached some understandings on these issues, which I have already talked about. Is that to formulate one position for the armed groups.
Sudan's ruling military council and the Forces of Freedom and Change, an umbrella group of Sudanese political and armed factions, agreed a 3-year power-sharing deal this month, but the SPLMA North is not part of that would-be transitional government. The Transitional Military Council is therefore working on a separate arrangement with the SPLMA North. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
On to Somalia now, and police are investigating how a female suicide bomber entered a highly guarded local government headquarters and killed a senior government official on Wednesday. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Billow has this story.
The death toll from Wednesday's suicide blast in Mogadishu has risen to 11 after 2 more victims succumbed to their injuries. On Thursday, 12 blast victims were airlifted to Qatar, including the mayor of Mogadishu, Abdurrahman Omar Usman. Senior local government officials were among those killed in that attack. Police are yet to issue an official statement on the attack, but a female bomber is said to have detonated explosives at a security gathering chaired by the city mayor and district heads. It's the 5th time Al-Shabaab is using a female bomber to carry out an attack here in the country. In 2011, a female suicide bomber detonated her explosives, killing the national security minister, marking a major change of tactic by the militant group on its high-profile targets.
The use of female suicide bombers isn't something new for Al-Shabaab, but this clearly shows how weak the group has become. In the past, it employed conventional means in fighting government forces, but the use of women to carry out attacks proves Al-Shabaab's weakness.
Investigations by the police is expected to reveal how the female bomber was able to smuggle explosives inside the heavily guarded local government headquarters and target a security meeting. Police are also yet to identify if the bomber had inside support. A number of people have been arrested in connection with that attack. Analysts say the attack on top officials is aimed at weakening the country's efforts in eradicating terrorist groups.
The government has launched offensive recently on several fronts. This is why Al-Shabaab is trying to cover its loss through attacks in the city. Attacks on government institutions is supposed to shift the focus on the fight, and that is why they're using insiders sometimes to carry out their attacks.
Al-Shabaab says its target was an American national recently appointed to head the United Nations mission in Somalia, who had just left the local government offices shortly before the attack. Security on major government installations has been put on high alert following the recent attack. Experts now want the government to invest heavily on intelligence so as to thwart such high-profile attacks and an increase in ground offensive to dislodge the fighters from some of its remaining strongholds. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
American lawmaker Nancy Pelosi is in Ghana to mark the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in America. The Speaker of the United States House of Representatives is also expected to hold high-level discussions on issues such as regional security, as well as sustainable and inclusive development with Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo and other top officials. CG10's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports now from Accra.
Nancy Pelosi and her delegation were met by the U.S. Ambassador to Ghana, Stephanie S. Sullivan, and the Speaker of Parliament, Mike Ironkwe, when they arrived at the airport in Accra on Sunday. In addition to holding bilateral talks with Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo, she will on Wednesday deliver a speech in the country's parliament. While in Ghana, Speaker Pelosi and her delegation will pay a visit to the Cape Coast and Elmina castles. At the Cape Coast Castle, they will tour the Door of No Return to observe the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved Africans landing in America. 20 Africans landed at Point Comfort in 1619 in the English settlement that would become the U.S. state of Virginia. More than 12 million Africans were brought against their will as slaves across the Atlantic. Eventually, there would be more than 4 million slaves of African descent in the U.S. The visit coincides with this year's Pan-African Festival and Emancipation Day, which aims to reunite Africans from the diaspora with their roots. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
All the business news coming up for you after the break, including top negotiators from China and the United States to meet in Shanghai on Tuesday and Wednesday for continued trade talks. And economic growth in Tanzania slows in the first quarter of this year.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Top negotiators from China and the United States will meet in Shanghai on Tuesday and Wednesday for continued talks. This will be the first time that they are meeting since President Xi Jinping and the US counterpart Donald Trump agreed in June to resume economic and trade consultations. Experts say both sides are working to ensure a new round of productive talks. CG10's Huna explains.
The meeting scheduled this week will be the first face-to-face discussions between the two sides since their top leaders met at the G20 summit in Japan last month. Analysts said that holding the talks in Shanghai, the country's financial hub, will enable the U.S. to better understand China's determination to open up further. Previously, the trade talks in China took place in Beijing.
The recent Chinese purchase of U.S. agricultural products sends a positive signal and paves the way for trade talks in Shanghai.
According to China's Development and Reform Commission and the Ministry of Commerce on Sunday, several million tons of soybeans have already been loaded and will soon be on their way to China. Meanwhile, the U.S. has already exempted extra duties on 110 items of industrial products from China. Earlier this month, some Chinese enterprises have consulted with U.S. suppliers over the prices of cotton, pork, and sorghum. Agreements have been reached on some products and also on the exemptions of extra duties on U.S. imports.
There is huge demand in Chinese agricultural products market. Our import is growing year by year. The U.S. side can only benefit by cooperating with China.
Experts say that Chinese enterprises will continue to purchase U.S. agricultural products in accordance with its needs. And sources from both ministries said the new deals on imports of U.S. agricultural products will be reached as long as prices are reasonable and the products of good quality. China hopes that the U.S. can come up with more concrete measures to ensure a good atmosphere and positive outcome for the trade talks. Honat CGTN, Beijing.
Economic growth in Tanzania slowed to 6.6% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2019 from 7.5% over the same period last year. The National Bureau of Statistics attributes the slowdown to a drop in construction, agriculture and manufacturing activity. The mining sector, which has been a target of repeated government interventions, rebounded to 10% from a 5.7% decline during the same period in 2018. The growth of the mining sector was mainly due to an increase in production of gold, coal and diamonds. The China-Egypt Business Forum has closed in the Egyptian capital. President of the China South Cooperation Promotion Association, Liu Xinhua, said the decision on Egypt was deliberate and based on long-standing bilateral relations between the two countries. The Business Forum covered finance, infrastructure, environmental protection, electronic technology, culture and textiles, among other sectors. More than 100 representatives from the two countries took part. It was also used to elaborate benefits of the Chinese-led Belt and Road Initiative that Egypt has signed into. The initiative will connect many parts of the world by rail, road and sea, and is expected to enhance how countries trade with each other. Egypt's state-owned airline, EgyptAir, has received a first-of-its-kind plane that uses biofuel. The airline took delivery of a Boeing 737-9 Dreamliner, reputed for low carbon emissions. Yasser Hakim with the details.
It's the fifth out of 6 Dreamliners that Egypt has purchased from the Seattle-based producer. This Boeing 787-9 is seen as the ultimate luxury.
It was 20% more efficient in fuel consumption, the body made of composite material. This will be a very great added value to EgyptAir because it's a very important, up-to-date, modern aircraft that has so many facilities to accommodate the passengers, very good entertainment in the interior, and it's very economic.
The Dreamliners, along with another 18 new planes, are meant to keep EgyptAir on par with its competitors in Africa.
Up to the past 2 years, EgyptAir was running in losses due to several problems. Of course, one of them is the devaluation of the Egyptian pounds and the political situation at that time and so on. The very tough competitor for EgyptAir in Africa is the Ethiopian Airlines. Ethiopian Airlines started in cooperation with TWE, and after that it went alone. Ethiopian Airlines are flying to almost 80 to 85 countries in Africa, and they are making very good use of the treaty of the free skies that has been signed lately this year for Africa. And I think EgyptAir should do the same.
EgyptAir has also been upgrading its client services and other aspects of operations.
The upgrade in the EgyptAir fleet does not only serve the company's developmental efforts, but it will also have an impact on the tourism industry in the country, which will benefit from such a development.
Tourism inflow had increased from 8 million to 13 million tourists a year in the last 3 years. Experts say the state-owned airlines has had a hand in this improvement.
We had a problem in that there were not enough planes that can go long distances to Australia, US, Canada, Latin America and the Far East, for instance, without having to make several stops. But the new planes can travel long distances directly, making it easier and faster to bring more tourists. It also helps in opening new markets and destinations unavailable before, such as the African market, which we are now targeting.
The Egyptian airliner says the 6th and final Boeing 787 should be received by the end of the year. That's Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Thousands of young entrepreneurs from across the continent met in the Nigerian capital Abuja for the 5th edition of the Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Forum. It's a summit for African startups to engage with policymakers, mentors and receive grants. Elumelu is championing entrepreneurship across Africa and has committed $100 million to grow African startups and young businesses over a 10-year period. CGTN's Deji Badmus now reports.
Launched in 2014, the Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Program aims to identify, train, mentor and fund 10,000 African entrepreneurs over a 10-year period who it believes could go on to create at least 1 million new jobs and generate around $10 billion in new business revenue. The foundation has so far invested $25 million on 7,520 entrepreneurs.
I came to Abuja, Nigeria, to be able to learn from the other presidents who are going to come on board, other speakers who are going to come on board, other global business leaders and all that. To be able to take the knowledge, the experience, the expertise back to Ghana and be able to implement all that into my business.
I'm here to meet other African entrepreneurs, network, and do business.
Right in this hall is where the young entrepreneurs interface directly with the policymakers and business leaders.
The young African entrepreneurs, the stage is now yours to take and actualize your dreams and aspirations. What we do at the Tony Elumelu Foundation is just to create this kind of platform for all of you, give you the opportunity to interact with our leaders and give you little seed capital to help you prove your ideas so that people, our young ones, don't go to the grave with their ideas.
And just as in the previous 4 editions, the foundation lined up a number of African leaders and policymakers to interact with the young entrepreneurs and share their experiences on some subjects.
Development is something we must do. Prosperity is something we must achieve. So how do we get there? We have to create that vision of how we move forward. It starts with the people. If you have knowledge, if you have invested in skills, if you are investing in infrastructure, what do you do with that? What follows is really business. It's doing business. It's entrepreneurship. It's people's creativity and innovation that has to be put into play. At the same time, that would not happen unless and until you invest in a conducive, good governance environment that will allow what needs to happen to take place.
I'm glad that a number of African governments are represented here. We're challenged to create the enabling environment for all of these young entrepreneurs to thrive. And the promise of entrepreneurship banks, the promises that we've made about establishing entrepreneurship banks must be kept.
The young people are not liabilities, they are assets. And when you go into a bank as a young person, you enter right there, nobody sees assets. Everybody sees risk, risk, and risk. Well, as president of African Development Bank, this is the point I want to make. It's that we must begin to put our capital at risk for the young people of Africa. What I want to propose today is this, that it's time for African leaders, African governments, to begin to shift from youth empowerment to youth investment.
It's been quite a rewarding period for the young entrepreneurs gathered here. In all, 3,050 of them got seed funding of $5,000 each to develop and scale their enterprises. Of that number, 2,050 were actually sponsored by the African Development Bank and the United Nations Development Program UNDP. They would continue to receive mentorship as they go on to achieve their dreams. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Lots more coming up for you after the break, including...
See Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Chirping of birds, sounds of whispering trees, burbling of streams. When sunlight sets the forest's leaves aglow, and waterfall surges down from the mountain, we see and hear the Earth's wondrous beauty. The Earth is meant to be appreciated, and the life of its inhabitants deserves our endless exploration. Come with CGTN to listen and see, in chorus of life, to marvel at nature and life.
Let's head over to Egypt, where a man initially from Poland has spent decades earning a living by adorning a monastery cave with biblical artwork. Let's take a look.
51-year-old Mario has spent more than 2 decades carving the rugged insides of the 7 cave churches and the chapels of the monastery with designs inspired by biblical stories. The Polish artist says he initially arrived in Egypt on an educational mission, looking for an opportunity to serve God at the monastery.
I never thought I would be talented, and it's not something I planned. It was not even related to my studies or my job. I believe that God gifted me with this talent for sculpture. I was so young when I started. I was 18. I wanted to do something that would bring me closer to God.
Mario says his journey was not easy in the beginning. He has practiced sculpting for more than 23 years and completed about 70 sculptures that have added to the monastery's allure by giving it an ancient look. He says he sculpts biblical figures to fulfill the wishes of the monastery's parish priest, whom he met in the early 1990s in Cairo.
Our message is to let people understand that we are not sculpting statues to be worshipped. We are telling the history through biblical art. It's like an artistic language, just like the pharaohs when they used to tell stories through their drawings.
Over the years, Mario has become known to everyone in the monastery and the thousands of people living in the city. He has mastered the Arabic language and developed a particularly strong command of the Egyptian dialect. Despite marrying an Egyptian woman and siring 2 daughters with her, Mario is still not an Egyptian citizen, as the law in the country does not allow him to obtain permanent residency. Nonetheless, he does not see himself settling anywhere else other than Egypt. Jane Kale, CGTN.
All the sports news coming up for you after the break, including